Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third episode in our Jumpstart American Job series. I'm Nancy McClernand, President and CEO of the Global Business Alliance. We are a trade association uniquely representing international companies doing business in the United States across a wide variety of industries. We advocate for policies to ensure that the United States remains the most competitive location for foreign direct investment, which in turn increases opportunities for Americans for jobs as well as U.S. economic growth. In order to accomplish that, we believe it is important to continue to strengthen our global connections with our allies around the world. GBA is producing this unique 5-part series to share practical perspectives from the private sector as we talk to executives at some of America's leading companies and business associations on the priorities needed to navigate these very uncertain times. I've really been encouraged by what we've learned in our past 2 episodes, by the amount of collaboration and coordination that's happening in the private sector to ensure that we actually get to the other side of this health and economic crisis together. If you've missed any of the previous episodes, you can find them on our website, jumpstartjobs.org, in the About the series. Today, we'll be talking about the retail and wholesale industries. Face masks, curbside pickup, and ensuring social distancing in stores are just some of the ways retailers have adapted to the health crisis. Further, the escalating threat of additional tariffs on imports, corresponding retaliation on exports, and political talk about severing some of our global supply chains has made commerce even more complicated. Joining me to discuss these issues today are executives from 2 GBA members, Jean-Marie Treiton, U.S. President of Unibail Rodamco Westfield, and Steve Presley, Chairman and CEO at Nestle USA. Good morning, gentlemen. Steve, I'd like to begin on an uplifting topic. There really is no better example of the importance of global connections than how I've seen international companies help their U.S. communities across the country from the very beginning of this pandemic. Now, Nestle is globally headquartered in Switzerland, but I'd like you to talk a little bit about your company's efforts on this front in the United States.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nancy. And, look, we're headquartered in Switzerland, but the U.S. is by far our largest market. And so we have almost 40,000 employees in the U.S. and do just under $30 billion of sales just in the U.S. So the U.S. is an incredibly important market for us. And the reality is the communities we operate in and the importance of the U.S. and being a good corporate citizen in this market is true in the U.S. or in any other market we participate in. And so we've been able to help, one of our founding principles or one of our principles we operate under all the time is to try to be an excellent corporate citizen in the community, any of the communities we operate in. So we do that across all of the 77 towns we operate factories in or distribution centers or any of our corporate headquarters. And, if you look at it globally, we've been able to partner with the Red Cross and made a $10 million donation globally, but also $1 million here in the U.S. And that's just from a corporate standpoint. If you look at what we've done in the community, more closely involved in the towns, we've done everything from cash donations of over $6 million, 4 million meals we've donated in the U.S. and countless cases of millions of cases of bottled water. So we always continue to strive to serve the communities as best as possible. And frankly, we listen to what they need from us, and then we try to step up and help as a good partner in the towns we operate in.
That's really, really terrific. Being in the food industry, Nestle is certainly what anyone would deem as being an essential business. I know that folks have relied upon your ability to continue operating. So can you share with us how the company has navigated over the last 5 months? Have you had any issues getting your products to market or any additional challenges?
Yeah, certainly. I don't think any of us had the global pandemic playbook to go to and say, okay, now go to step A, B, and C. But, for over 100 years, families in the U.S. have counted on Nestle to deliver delicious food and beverages to their table every day. And what we've said, look, we play as the largest player in this market, we play an incredible role in helping consumers feel comfortable when they show up to the grocery store and there's product on shelf. That's that first sign of normalcy. And so working with our retail partners, and the biggest challenge has been, if you're operating 77 factories with, almost 40,000 employees, is focusing on their safety, their well-being, making sure you continue running the factories, continue getting every single case out the door. And that challenge has been one that our teams have risen to the occasion incredibly well. And some of the challenges, I say first and foremost, the biggest challenge that we've seen huge increases of demand in normal, um, food and beverages through the grocery channel, and so adjusting to those demand increases has been a real challenge. And really, because we've spent 50 years all making our supply chains as efficient as we can and connected globally everywhere we can to maximize efficiency, and they're not built for 50% increase instantaneously. And so that's been an adjustment, but our teams have risen to the occasion. I think some of the other challenges just been, we're a global company with an incredible global footprint, and that provides unique opportunities for us in terms of bringing products across border that are successful in one country that are emerging trends here. That's been more difficult in this crisis, and just because we've had tighter border controls and slower processes on that, that's been a challenge. And so we continue to work to bring that product across the border. And then I'd say the other one is part of also being a large global company is, one of the things I think that helps us serve a global consumer is the ability to move our talent around the world. And frankly, I think it's been really difficult in the pandemic as we focused on other things, just being able to move our talent as freely as we do around the world, both out and in, to help support the consumer. And so those are just some of the challenges. I think our supply chains have been stressed from all of our suppliers. I think they've all done an incredible job. The meat industry certainly was a very public one that came in, and as a large supplier to us, that had some impact, but not anything the teams weren't able to handle. And I think we're able to continue cranking out products every day for the consumer. And so, but we learn new things, and there are new challenges that pop up every day. I think this has gone on longer than any of us probably thought, and will continue to go on. And so it's almost this new pattern of, hey, look, you just got to be able to have the agility as an organization to adjust to whatever the new crisis is of the day. You adjust, get your teams focused on how to get through this, and then move on and deliver for the consumer.
Can you share with us how Westfield has been working with its retail clients throughout the crisis? Any perspectives to offer there?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you for having me. Today, I'm really glad to be with you and also alongside Steve, talking about this, kind of very specific experience that is this pandemic and the crisis that is going with it. The first thing that I want to say is that the first focus of Unibail-Rodamco Westfield has been, the safety of our retailers, employees, and customers. So as soon as we understood that we had to close and shut down our malls, we did it, and we tried to do it properly, and started also to focus on two things. The first one is how we will be able to reopen, and how do we prepare the reopening of our malls, because it was clear that one day we'd be able to reopen. And secondly, how do we support the community that we serve, and how we help these communities to go through this terrible moments. And I'm happy to say that we've been able to welcome on some of our parking places that were obviously without any cars, that we have been able to accommodate COVID-19 testing sites, that we have also a lot of NGOs that are supporting the communities, and among which one that is I think important for Steve as well, that is No Kid Hungry, that with whom we have a partnership, and I know that Nestle has a partnership also here in so did a lot for the communities. Once we had the ability to reopen, the job that we did was really working on what are the safety measures, what are the requirements according to the CDC and the different local health departments that we'll have to put in place. And we really very soon saw that there was a kind of differences in between the different requirements, and that we'll need the help of a third party to help us, assessing what are the right measures to put in place, and mitigation measures to put in place to reopen our malls. So we partnered with Bureau Veritas that certified our best practices, processes, and what was implemented in our mall, so that gives us the ability to be sure that we not only follow the requirements, but also exceed and far exceed the requirements in terms of social distancing, mitigation measures to avoid the spread of the COVID-19. So that's in place. And then the second topic was, how can we help our retailers to be able to do business during the closure? So we worked on the curbside deliveries. So a lot of our retailers worked on their development of their online business, but also when you do online, you need whether to get the deliveries of your product or your product being picked up at one place. And we really had in our centers the ability to pick up the products that were bought online, as well as another thing that is very important here is the ability to have access to meals and the food that the restaurants are delivering. And we helped a lot. And so with partnership with delivery companies, but also directly with our restaurants operators, the ability to pick up your food directly at our counters and having a touchless experience when it comes to picking up your meals. So that has been the focus. Now, what I can say is that I've been really impressed by what the retailers with us have been doing in preparing the reopening. And something that is really important to understand, and I think also for the people, because sometimes we got the feeling that maybe malls are equal to crowd and a lot of gathering. We have been with the retailers taking care of the way you organize the queues, such as you mitigate the social distancing or you accommodate the social distancing. And the retailers have been putting in place specific measures as well within their retail stores and within their stores to really accommodate these mitigation measures. So a great partnership. And I think that when you tour the assets and of the main landlords in this country, you will see that they have been taking very seriously these mitigation measures that are really important, because customers as well as employees needs to feel safe, and such as you get a confidence, and then the people are coming back to help the business.
Yeah, there's definitely been an enormous amount of innovation that we've seen retailers and restaurants put forth over the last 5 months. It's really been amazing. Can you talk a little bit about what shifts you might have seen in consumer demand, any kind of consumer behavior? And then maybe
so I think that so far we see, I don't know if it would be a long-lasting trend that we see in the change of the customer behavior. But one thing is for sure. First, traffic-wise, in the malls that we have reopened, we are way below what we used to have pre-COVID, and we are more in the range to 50 to 60% of the traffic that we had pre-COVID. But people that are coming to our malls or visiting our malls are somehow mission-driven, much more than before. So loyal customers used to come several times a month. We see that they have lowered the frequency of their visit. But when they come, they know exactly what they want. They know exactly where they want to go. And then the conversion rate of these people is much higher, and the spending basket is much higher, which means that despite the decrease of the traffic, you still have a kind of good business in the stores, and that's the good news. And people are coming less, but they know why they come and what they want to buy. So that's the first shift that I see. I don't know if it will last, maybe because I hope that they will come back and hang around again and come more often. I think it's good, but also for the socialization and the people being able to gather and meet together. The other shift is definitely much more use of the technology, smartphone application features like the one that we put in place, like that is inline paths that gives you the ability, to queue virtually. So you book your appointment in the store, and when you can visit, and then you don't have to queue. You avoid being too close to people, obviously, or having to queue within with the social distancing. So you can better organize your trip or your journey, your customer journey within the mall, and that's important because people are preparing much more than what they used to do their visits. They used to browse online a little bit, so now you see that they browse online before every visit. They know exactly what they want, and then they go directly to these stores.
Steve, can you share any maybe surprises you've seen in shifts in consumer demand for your products?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say just to echo the comments Jean-Marie just made, it's like, look, the reality is the technology or e-commerce has I think it was always emerging as a trend, and clearly it was there, but this crisis definitely accelerated the use of technology and the shopping behavior. And it's similar in whatever the business you're in. When you look at shoppers, they want to take fewer trips, reduce the amount of times they're out in terms of exposure, so they have larger baskets. We see it across all of our retail partners in grocery as well. Much bigger baskets and really narrowed the number of trips per week. And I think that as long as we're in this crisis period, and whether it's better treatment protocol or a vaccine, I think that will stick for a period of time. How long, you don't know, but clearly that's been a significant change in shopping behavior. One of the biggest changes we've seen in terms of the demand landscape for food and beverage is really this idea of, look, for the last 10 years, more and more of the food dollars have been shifting to out of home than in home. And you have a generation of young mothers, and so there really aren't bakers or big cooks in the kitchen. And so what this did really was re-engage an entire generation around the joy that you get from preparing a meal or maybe baking cookies with the kids. The baking category has exploded, and you look at it and you're like, okay, I get people are baking more because they're at home more, but the size of increases in the enjoyment a young family gets cooking together and baking, that's really been a pleasant surprise for us because it's a big portion of our business. But I do think it's a trend that'll stick because it is one that I think families really enjoy. They love the creative aspect of that, and that'll happen. And so this shift from out of home to in home, it's definitely strong now. How long will it stay? I think to some degree, the practices that were mentioned in terms of what you have to do to make the dining out experience safer or will have an impact to the long-term demand. When will it get back to normal? I don't think any of us really know. But what we know is we'll have the sustained increase in demand in the in-home, because I think people, have enjoyed making that cup of coffee. And you see, if you look at the social media explode around trying to mock up different kind of unique coffee cocktails and beverages, and that's been great for us. And really unleashing the consumer's creativity and bringing it to bear in their house has been what they've usually relied on an out-of-home experience for. So I think that trend will continue, and how I think it will continue for a very long time. I think to the degree it is now, probably not, as that goes. And
Yeah,
then the last one I just say in terms of kind of the broader trends is I think you saw the shift in e-commerce really rapidly. With food and beverage was kind of sleepy in that category. It wasn't really accelerating. Consumers still like to touch and feel. You saw the big jump in the crisis. And I think now consumers really understand the convenience and the benefit of that. And so, yes, you've seen the change. I actually think that one will accelerate even further from where it was.
Jean-Marie, I'd like to turn now to hear a little bit about your experience about working with policymakers over the past few months. Can you talk a little bit about what misconceptions or barriers that you have encountered from policymakers?
Yes, maybe to start with just the retail industry and in the US, and what does it represent, because it's very important. It's almost 1 out of 4 jobs in the US economy today that are retail related, so that's not a small number. It's also 70% of the tenants in the malls are small businesses below 10 employees. So it gives you a range of small businesses that are involved in the retail and that are suffering today from the crisis. It's more than $400 billion of tax paid directly to the federal government or to the local authorities. So it's not small as well. When you look at the loss of the shutdown linked to the lockdown, is $123 billion of sales that have been lost. It's more than $35 billion of rent that have not been paid so far globally on the retail industry. It's just to give the magnitude of the impact. And despite this impact that we have on the economy, we have been excluded as an industry the programs, the support programs and the aids that have been revised or prepared by the government and the policymakers, and that's obviously I would say, sorry for the word, but a kind of shame. The topic is that a focus has been made on retailers, a small focus, but then these retailers, and we try to help them a lot, suffered from the clarity of these policies. So it was supposedly, to help these retailers to go through the crisis, but then there's been put so much constraints on the way they can use, these loans that have been, given to them, that this is hard for them to really, help or save their businesses. We need more flexibility in the way these retailers can, work or use these loans, and that's really important for them to be able, to go through the crisis. And we know that there would be a kind of, stop and go, phase one, then wave two. So we know that we are in this crisis for a while, as long as we don't have a vaccine. So that's for sure. So more clarity and more flexibility for the retailers would be, I think, key. The other topic is obviously that we need to connect the dots, and the policymakers needs to connect the dots. Usually, the landlords have, I don't know why, but seen as, like having deep pockets. So you give, rent forgiveness, or you ensure that, there will be rent forgiveness for the retailers, but you don't take care of the landlords that are, in fact, financing the development of the retailers, so the physical development of the retailers, and giving them access to the financing of the banks. So we are an intermediary in between the retailers and the banks. So when a retailer doesn't pay his rent, we cannot pay the banks. And if we cannot pay the banks, then there is an issue for the banks. So this is a systemic issue. And at that stage, there had been, a low level of help, on the retailers, not at all on the landlords, and this will have an effect on the banks. And today we have discussions with the banks around the forbearance of the debt service and how do we deal with that. Why that? Because the retailers are not doing sales during the shutdown, or much less sales than before, so they cannot pay the rent. And we have already, as a landlord, and we are not the only one, taken some measures to help and giving flexibility to the retailers, giving them forbearance of the rent. At the beginning of the crisis, we decided that we'll defer the rents of April, such as we don't put the pressure on these retailers, and they can focus on preparing the shutdown of their stores and the reopening of their stores. And we did the same in May. But when you do that, you have an issue in the way you can pay the debt service. And that's where, we need really now the policymakers to connect the dots and see that we have a systemic issue in the retail industry if we don't give, more clarity and flexibility on the retailers, and that we don't help, the landlords in their relationship with the banks, and that we help the banks, then there would be a global, potential collapse of one very important sector of the US economy. Again, this is one job out of 4 in the US.
Yeah, it's definitely a big part of the economy. Steve, I'm going to bring you back in here. Since taking over as CEO of Nestle in the US, I think it's fair to say that you've been a transformative leader there, which has included a number of M&A deals, such as selling off the US confections division and acquiring other companies. GBA did a survey in April asking our members if they thought the pandemic would spur further consolidation. About 44% believe that the pandemic would end up with more mergers and acquisitions. I'd like to get your take on that. What is your perspective in the M&A space from the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, for us, portfolio transformation or M&A deals and reshaping both on the buy and the sell side is part of our broader growth agenda, right? So you got to have a healthy business, but also we look really closely at where are the categories we want to go. And for Nestle, the US is one of its primary markets we're interested in and continue to invest in and continue to expand our presence here in the categories we're participating in, and maybe even some of the categories that we're not currently in. And so as you look, I think we've actually been able to complete several transactions through the pandemic, and the the business world is always incredible. I think the Nestle people show a tremendous agility, whether they're working from home overnight or they're having to, we keep moving ahead. And so we were able to continue our agenda around portfolio transformation, which was, our M&A related work. And so I do think there'll be an increase in activity. I think as companies try to figure out what the future of their demand landscape and the projection or the forward-looking view of their business, and that'll create opportunities for companies that come through this in a kind of strong manner. And so, and for us, I think we were interested in this marketplace before the crisis. We're interested during the crisis, and we're interested after the crisis. And so the U.S. is an incredibly strong market for us, and we'll continue to invest here. I think, a little bit connected, but not exact, anything we can do to improve the health of the consumer, and small businesses do drive consumer health in the U.S. in a big way. And so that's that kind of support and that kind of thing directly to the consumer and directly that focuses on these small businesses leads to healthy consumers, which leads to healthier businesses for us, and overall drives our investment in the marketplace.
Jean-Marie, could you talk a little bit about, from a policy perspective, issues that you think would help spur foreign direct investment in your sector?
Definitely. There is one thing that is easy to do. It's just to eliminate FIRPTA, so the Foreign Investment Real Estate Property Tax Act, that is preventing Westfield, so Unibail Rodamco Westfield, to invest more in the US, while we want to do more and to invest more. There is a study that's been done in 2017 that was saying that just by eliminating this, outdated regulation or law, they would get, very quickly more than $16 billion of investment in the US in the retail industry or in the real estate industry that will add to the GDP of this company. So I think it's easy, and for the long-term recovery of the economy, the long-term recovery of the retail industry and the real estate industry, that would be instrumental. So that's definitely something that I will advocate for.
Great. Well, listen, thank you, gentlemen, both for taking the time to join us this morning. I appreciate you offering your perspective, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Now, after this short message, I'll be joined by three leading association executives to explore the pandemic's impact on and outlook for America's workforce in the retail and wholesale industries. See you in 60 seconds. Welcome back. I'm really pleased now to be joined by three of my colleagues at associations representing key sectors in the U.S. retail and wholesale industries. Brian Dodge, President of the Retail Industry Leaders Association, Leslie Saracen, President and CEO of FMI, the Food Industry Association, and Peter Robinson, President and CEO of the U.S. Council for International Business. Peter, I'm going to go ahead and begin with you. The USCIB represents some of the most recognizable companies in the world, including many retailers and wholesalers. Can you share with us what you've heard from your members in terms of the impact the pandemic has had on them?
Well, Nancy, I'd say in this unprecedented time, what we buy, how we buy, when and where we buy is going through a seismic shift, and the impact has been severe. I would say that all of our members, whether in the retail or other sectors, have been in crisis management mode. But at the same time, they're rallying to address the pandemic in impressive, above and beyond ways. We have a COVID-19 page that demonstrates some of that. For example, Target supporting state and local nonprofits serving vulnerable communities, and globally supporting provision and distribution of critical supplies and equipment in the medical area. Amazon launching a multi-million diagnostics initiative to accelerate COVID-19 research, and in Europe committing millions to support those most affected by the pandemic. Nike and Hanes brands committing millions to support COVID-19 and including the mass production of PPEs. I'd say one distinctive attribute of USCIB members is their global perspective and action as partners in multilateral institutions to advance response and recovery. And they're very concerned about the health of the constituent components of their global supply chains overseas as well as here at home. So we have thus been supporting global business initiatives by the International Chamber of Commerce, such as ICC's Save Our SMEs campaign, the International Organization of Employers, and Business at OECD, calling for governmental support of small businesses to ensure their continued operation. And we've called for international financial institution focus on supporting SMEs in dire straits around the world with bridge funding, for example, to ensure their continued viability and given their importance to the global supply chains of our member companies, either in the retail or other sectors.
So Peter, I'm glad that you raised actually the multilateral institutions. I know that USCIB represents your members before a lot of them. Unfortunately, the pandemic has brought out a lot of parochial propensities of policymakers across the globe during this pandemic, right? We've seen that happening in the US and many other places. Do you think that the pandemic is going to have a result in sort of the long-term reevaluation of the role and scope of those multilateral institutions?
Yes, I think it's going to put an added element of importance on them. I think COVID-19 has put into sharp relief the depth of global interdependence and the need to build back better together. We're entering a new reality for business. It's not a return to normal or even a new normal. And we have a new imperative to enhance and strengthen employment, societal resilience, and sustainable development. COVID-19 knows no borders. It's a one world enemy and it needs a one world response. And we really need to be reaching across borders, joining hands and working on an economic recovery that's inclusive and acknowledges the importance of maintaining the viability of vulnerable economies as well as strong economies. Because I think we're only as strong as our weakest link. And multilateral institutions are the vehicles to ensure that we have an all-out, inclusive, and coordinated effort to build back better. And every institution across humanitarian, health, economic, trade, environmental roles needs to be involved, working closely with representative business organizations. So we, USCIB and our global affiliates, the International Chamber of Commerce, the International Organization of Employers, and Business at OECD, will be helping to ensure business leadership in this effort. And I'm sure that the U.S. private sector is going to be playing a major role in moving towards this new reality and building a healthier future. But again, multilateral institutions are the thing that will help us get there and to help us be better prepared for challenges in the future. So we need to be at the table talking about and planning how we can strengthen these institutions rather than watching from the sidelines.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Leslie, I'm going to bring you in. I talked earlier with Steve Presley from Nestle about how Nestle has continued to operate throughout the pandemic, right? The food industry had an essential work designation, of course. Can you talk a little bit how your members have responded, how they've kept their employees safe, because they've had to operate all throughout?
Well, it has been an interesting time in the food industry, and you're right. We were deemed essential workers from the get-go. It's been an interesting time to manage expectations of our employees, of our customers, because of course, nothing is more important to our companies than making sure that our customers are safe when they're shopping in our stores, and that our associates are safe while they're working in our stores. So we've had a lot of things going on that front. One of the issues, of course, has been trying to do our best to quell consumer anxiety and try to keep them calm through this process. At FMI, I closed our offices on March the 12th, and on the evening of the 13th, I was back in the office doing videotaping a PSA to help people understand how the supply chain works, and that in fact there was plenty of food in the supply chain, and that what in fact we were dealing with was a demand challenge rather than a supply challenge. And so I think our companies have worked very hard, and we've provided the support that we can to make sure that people are confident, that they feel more comfortable with how their stores are behaving, how their associates are behaving, and making sure that they feel comfortable with the supply chain that exists in the food and consumer products industry. So a lot has been going on there. And then we've also at FMI been doing a tremendous amount of intel gathering. We started in toward the end of March doing weekly consumer tracking on consumer buying habits, their changes in behaviors, the things that they seem to be concerned about in shopping for groceries. And we were able to provide that to our member companies so that they could then behave appropriately, given what their customer base was indicating they were most concerned about. And we've seen tremendous movement, of course, to online shopping. There are many of us, myself included, who always said, no one's going to choose my tomatoes but me. And it's interesting how quickly as the environment changes, our perspectives on things like tomatoes can change. And so now I think we've all become much more accustomed to having other people make choices for us in the stores. And those workers have just been amazing. I mean, the resilience that the supply chain has demonstrated perhaps is only matched by the resilience and commitment that's been demonstrated by our associates on the front line. We just were pleased this week with legislation that was introduced by Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa to acknowledge the contribution of the essential workforce by providing, hopefully, a tax benefit to essential workers so that they can receive some recompense for the fact that they've been at work every day and they've continued to keep the food supply chain moving and meeting Americans' needs. So it's been an exciting time and an interesting time for us.
Brian, I'm going to bring you in here now. We've obviously seen a lot of shifts in the marketplace. Retailers have created new business models. We're talking earlier with Jean-Marie from Westfield and Steve from Nestle about some of the innovative ways in which people are shopping now. Do you think that you're going to see a shift long term in some of these business models, or do you think that they're just sort of a bridge to get us out of the health crisis that we're in now?
So absolutely, there's going to be long-term implications. It's difficult to know necessarily at this point exactly what they will be, but much as Peter and Leslie have noted, the last 4 or 5 months have been exceedingly challenging for businesses. And as a result, they have adapted very quickly to the environment to serve their customers in new ways. Chief among them were looking for ways to get more volume out of their e-commerce platforms. So retailers that were forced to close, those that were deemed non-essential in March, had no alternative to sell their goods otherwise, unless through the e-commerce platform. And so many of them managed to get more than 100% out of the capacity of those systems. but also made very rapid investments in order to find greater efficiencies and to move more product through that. The reality was much of the work that was done by the federal government to ensure that the economy remained stable during this period of time ensured that there was an opportunity for these sales to happen. And so we wanted to make sure that they were able to, customers were able to access the goods that they wanted very quickly. It started first through e-commerce, and again, that accelerated over time as investments came into play and they would get more volume out of there. But they also found ways to utilize their store fleet in ways that previously they weren't utilized. So curbside pickup became pretty common and remains very common. And I suspect that is an example of something that will likely persist long term, because not only is it contactless, it's quite convenient. I've used it several times myself. But you're also seeing stores used as small distribution centers for to again accentuate the efficiency of the supply chain as it relates to e-commerce. So some of these things will be small bore and they'll be behind the scenes. Some will be more visible to consumers. I suspect that retailers are pulling many of their investments in e-commerce and related consumer-facing type actions forward. So things that they intended to invest in perhaps next year or beyond are moving closer because of the unknown that lies ahead. The last thing that I would note, and I think this is a cultural shift for many retailers, is circumstances force them to adapt very, very quickly to the COVID crisis. They are now seeing that perhaps innovations that may have previously taken 6 months to pilot and implement can be done in a week or two. They don't want to do that for everything, but they've learned they have the capacity to do that. And I think real stars, Leslie did, I think, an excellent job of talking about the incredible work that frontline employees have done. And there's no gratitude enough for all of their work. But I think deeper into the organizations, the experts who are managing supply chain and elsewhere are really showing their strengths right now. And many of them are developing skills that will inform the way that they operate into the future. And that really foretells many, many innovations that lie ahead that we haven't begun to see.
I'd like to follow up with some questions on face masks, which obviously has been in the news quite a bit. The CDC considers masks a critical preventative measure for COVID-19. Brian, RELA sent a letter to governors on July 6th, urging all of them to issue statewide mask mandates. And since then, we've had many retailers, including Target, Best Buy, Walmart, and Home Depot, announce themselves individually that all shoppers will be required to wear a mask. You know, the private sector is stepping in, just as we saw at the beginning of the crisis, really, when retailers and other businesses started closing even before government did. Can I get your reaction to how retailers have viewed policy that they've seen their peers do and statewide either lack of mandates or those that have issued mandates?
Sure. So retailers have long believed since the early days of the COVID crisis that mask wearing is critically important. In early April, we worked with members and many of Leslie's members as well to develop a series of protocols that were pretty common across the industry that we could then bring to governors and highlight as the ones that were in fact proper for keeping customers safe in store environments. And the first on that long list was wearing masks. And so at that point, retailers were requiring employees to wear masks and strongly encouraging customers to wear masks. We're now 2 to 3 months past that point, and retailers are continuing to escalate the intensity of their request to have masks in place. And what we've learned is that the overwhelming majority of consumers agree that mask wearing is important, and they are enthusiastically putting their masks on when they go to stores because they know how important it is. There is a small set of customers who believe differently for a variety of reasons. And those customers are emboldened in places where there is no statewide mandate. And I think it's for 2 reasons. One, it gets to the underlying issue that they don't want to wear it. And 2, and I'll take a glass half full perspective on this, there's a lack of clarity around what their obligation is when they go out to shop. And so if government can do its job, its essential job, which is the safety and well-being of constituents, then they can work very well with retailers to ensure that customers who go into stores have masks on. The trouble is, there's two major issues that we're encountering right now. The first is some of the states have introduced these mask mandates, have placed the obligation on businesses to police it, which is a problem. Those heroic frontline retail employees who are serving customers every day are not law enforcement, and they've been put into the role of playing law enforcement with customers, which is a recipe for conflict. And retailers want to keep their employees safe, and that is not something that they necessarily want to do. In those states that have instituted the mandates on the individual themselves, the problem that we're seeing now is conflict between customers. So retailers have developed excellent training in order how to manage the conversations with customers. They're providing masks. There's lots of signage. There's a clear expectation of what to do in many states about what you do when you come to the stores. But then when customers come in and they're not wearing a mask, and retailers are unable to block them from entering the store, then conflict is emerging between customers. And so we think that the mask mandate at the state is critically important. We think government leaders have an obligation to be outspoken around this, because at the end of the day, we know that it brings down the incidence of spread, and that's all of our overall objectives.
Yeah, absolutely. Leslie, Peter, anything to add on that about the sort of the private sector taking the lead, but wanting the government to step in to help provide clarity?
Well, I would just agree completely with Brian. I think we're in a similar place on this, in feeling that we should not, our employees should not be in the business of law enforcement, but also feeling strenuously that doing everything we can to protect the health and well-being of both our associates and all the other customers in the stores is critical. You know, one of the things that we have begun to focus more on is ways that the enhancements we have been able to do in the grocery sector to our click and collect and our home delivery platforms, how that helps address some of this. Because then those individuals who don't want to wear a mask may not absolutely need to come in the store at all. You know, there are workarounds and ways that we can address this. But at the end of the day, doing everything we can to try to prevent the spread is our number one criteria.
That's actually a really good point about the curbside pickup. Leslie, you mentioned value chains earlier, and value chains in the food industry have been in the spotlight in recent months. Can you talk a little bit about how the industry has responded to disruptions in this area?
You know, it's been fascinating. Those of us who have worked in the industry for as many years as I have understand the notions of the supply chain and how it functions, and that these products don't just miraculously appear on grocery shelves. There's a process involved. And what's been fascinating, and I think also reassuring as we've gone through this, is how now the notion of the value chain is something that is fairly commonly understood in today's society. And I think if there's, again, a silver lining in this whole thing, it's that we now understand that these products don't just miraculously appear. So being able to work closely with our supplier partners in making decisions and changing processes to address some of these concerns has been critical to our success. What we've seen our supplier partners do in many instances is change the way they produce products. And so that is why sometimes our customers don't find every flavor variety or every package size that they're accustomed to on the shelf when they shop. And it's because those suppliers have identified the most popular or the most frequently asked for products, and then eliminated some of the SKUs to focus on production of the most important items in their repertoire. It helps produce more quickly, and it meets the needs of more consumers on a regular basis. So this collaboration throughout the supply chain has been critical to being able to keep products on the shelf. And I think we've all learned a lot in that process, which will make it much easier for us to address any kinds of disaster situations we have to face going forward.
Brian, I'd like to bring you in on the conversation about supply chains. Before the virus hit, we had the benefit of a just-in-time economy, and now supply chains have been stretched like never before. Do you think that the pandemic will lead your members to consolidate their supply chains in the United States, as some policymakers have called for, or to diversify more?
Yeah, so I think the COVID crisis has only accentuated the trend that already existed, and that is one towards more diverse supply chains. I think to the extent that elements of the supply chain can be brought back to the United States, businesses are looking at that, but the economics are not necessarily there for that, for certainly for many categories. And so what I think we're going to see is more retailers moving the volume of their sourcing out of high density countries, China specifically. And this is driven by trade policy, which has evolved in a far more protectionist way, certainly more so than we would ever like it to. But the harsh reality is, it's just smarter for businesses to have their sourcing spread across the world in ways that it wasn't necessarily before. It just limits the risk.
Yeah, Peter, additional thoughts that you have on the U.S. moving toward policies that sever our global supply chains, as some have called for.
Well, I think we share the concern at USCIB, Nancy, that you've expressed as well in terms of protectionist trends. I think that as Brian mentioned, the virus has exacerbated the disruptions and given air cover to embrace protectionist policies by governments. We've strongly opposed those kinds of approaches over the years. More tariffs mean unwelcome taxes here at home on U.S. consumers and businesses, raising prices and threatening U.S. jobs and lowering U.S. competitiveness. I think that the tricky thing is that the pandemic came along on top of an already existing undercurrent of protectionism, and has highlighted some of the weaknesses. I think that most from what I've seen too, our member companies are, when they talk about securing supply chains, we're not talking about reshoring, but really what the companies are doing to diversify supply chains and not relying 100% on one single location, for example. But you also mentioned this idea of Buy America, and I know that's kind of become a siren call. We have some concerns about that in terms of the Trump administration and the possible Biden administration, and just think that those kinds of policies will lead to a distortion of trade flows and higher prices for consumers. We think have long thought that the right approach is rather to focus on expanding and strengthening government procurement agreements under the WTO and bilateral and regional agreements. And our goal should be to increase opportunities for American companies in government procurement markets abroad and not build walls around the U.S. market. I understand the political appeal of the simplistic argument that let's use our government money to buy stuff here at home rather than overseas. But that may have worked in the past, but it's just not. It's going to be a recipe for stagnation and decline in today's and tomorrow's competitive globalized supply chain economy. So I think we all have to realize that, including our policymakers, that the global economy is able to thrive because of access to foreign markets. I know that you and your member companies have demonstrated that and are on the line in terms of Buy America, Buy Japanese, Buy French for that matter. But any policies that purposefully restrict those kinds of that access for reasons other than national security will ultimately not lead to growth, and that will necessarily have negative effects on the economy and workers.
Brian, can you talk a little bit about RILA's perspective on increased tariffs and some of the trade tensions, the impact on retailers?
Yeah, Peter said it right. The tariffs are taxes paid by American consumers. It undermines competitiveness. It's problematic. There's nothing good to be said about tariffs. We have worked aggressively to draw back, particularly the 301 tariffs on products coming here from China, because they're thoroughly inconsistent with the near-term objectives of policymakers, which is to ensure that businesses have the capital they need in order to weather this crisis. Instead, they're forced to pay tariffs to the federal government for products coming in that American consumers want. So, we understand the situation that we're in here, that we have lost a lot of ground in the free trade argument, but we are hopeful that there will be an opportunity to, again, take it sort of a glass half full perspective on what we've gone through in the last year or so as it relates to tariffs, to show the real impact of bad trade policy that in fact does undermine job growth. It undermines competitiveness. It increases costs for consumers. These were largely theoretical arguments for a lot of years because despite losing ground in the free trade argument, we were maintaining largely free trade policies. That has not been the case the last several years. And so we hope we can make up some ground on this hopefully quickly and get back to knocking down barriers to trade around the world, because that is the way that we grow our economy. That is good for businesses. It's good for customers. It may not fit on a bumper sticker very well, but it is all true.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly as, we move past the health crisis, hopefully, and really digging into dealing with the economic one, ensuring those trade barriers are low and our ability to do business across borders is going to be more important than ever before. So I'd like to finish up now by talking a little bit about the future, the extent to which we can all kind of try to think about that. Leslie, what emerging issues do you see for the food industry as you look into the future, your workforce, and are there specific issues that can be addressed in a manner that would help contribute to job growth?
Well, I think, we have referenced earlier in our discussion here this growth in online shopping. And I think this future in the certainly the food retail sector, but I think retail more broadly, there's going to be a lot of change, continue to be a lot of change in the skill sets that we need in our industry, the focus areas that we'll have. In January of this year, we made some projections about what we thought the growth would be in online shopping over the course of the next 5 years. And I can tell you that in 5 months, we have pretty much achieved the goals that we thought it would take 5 years for us to accomplish. So I think the change in how we shop in using technology is going to necessarily have a change in how we operate. And the skill sets we're looking for some technology background in our workforce. I also think issues of diversity that have come up been widely discussed and addressed in recent months. We will be affected and are being affected on that level as well, and should be. These are issues that we, as Americans, we all need to be concerned about. And so I think we will be looking at a more diverse workforce in the food sector going forward. And then finally, I would say that one of the things we're very cognizant of is the interest and propensity of the generations that are coming along behind us in doing meaningful work that affects society at large. And I think if there's one thing we've learned during COVID-19, it's that if you are a person who would like to work in an environment where you are contributing daily and continually to the well-being of your fellow citizens, you'd be hard pressed to find an industry outside that's more focused in that area than the food industry is. And so I think we will be talking about that more, about our contributions to our communities, our contributions to society, and the need we all feel these days to try to give back.
To wrap up, I'm going to just actually turn to Brian for the last question. Congress is in the middle right now of considering the next aid package. Wondering if you have any thoughts on what should be included in that package from the retail industry perspective.
Sure. So I do give Congress considerable high marks, I should say, for the CARES Act passed now a couple of months ago. I think it addressed many of the issues that the industry was seeking them to tackle. We could always identify a few things missing here or there, but it was a pretty good deal because it allowed businesses to bridge pretty effectively from a period of time where many were closed to a point where they could reopen again. And it worked really diligently to preserve the underlying economy, which I think has largely been successful. As we look to the next wave, there's a couple of things that I think we are looking carefully at. First, liability protection for businesses that have operated throughout this crisis, have followed the guidance that has been provided to them. They've done incredible work to serve communities. They shouldn't now be subject to frivolous lawsuits by the plaintiffs' bar. And so we are intensely focused on that. And then the continued support for the broader economy, making sure that when we're not going to see a full recovery until we see a vaccine, and it's not perfectly clear as to when that's going to be. So continuing to ensure that there is a soft landing spot for those employees who are not at work right now, and that consumers have something that's supporting them through this period of unknown. The last point that I'll make around this, and it doesn't necessarily apply to Congress, it's more to the governors, it's acknowledging that we need to move beyond this arbitrary distinction of essential versus non-essential businesses. We are now far more informed about the virus and how to operate within it than we were in March. And all of the members that the three organizations here represent understand how to keep their employees and customers safe in a store environment. And so we should move to safe shopping as opposed to essential, non-essential as a distinction. If you have the protocols in place that can keep customers safe in the stores, then that should be the way that you're evaluated in terms of who stays open if there are additional orders put in place around the country.
Thank you, Brian, Leslie, and Peter. I appreciate you all joining us this morning to share your perspective. And thank you to everyone for tuning in this morning. And here's what we'll discuss next Monday.
Join us Monday, August 3rd for Servicing Small Business, Part 4 of the Jumpstart American Jobs series. As small businesses help drive America's economic recovery, large employers will be there to fuel their journey. Hear from leading business and industry experts about the critical link between large and small employers and the way policymakers can help small businesses jumpstart job creation. Reserve your virtual seat by registering at jumpstartjobs.org, an initiative of Global Business Alliance.
Our workforce is going to be really important, and interestingly enough, I think our learning organization is going to be critical because the upskilling and reskilling that certainly was true coming into the pandemic is even more intensified now in terms of, are we able to work in a sustained, remote, productive environment? What are those skills that we're going to need to come out of in terms of when we do that transformation of our business and transformation of all the technologies, the process, and actually, how we're going to serve our clients and our customers. Learning on a platform that is going to drive those new behaviors, those new skills, and really produce outcomes for the business are going to be critical to look at. Also, I would say culture and brand are going to be critical. How are you going to really continue to live your culture, live your values, bring your brand with you in terms of that transformation is going to be really important as you think about the broader and full circle of transformation and work reimagined.